Michael B. Jordan helped the police catch a criminal. It started on a quiet weekday afternoon in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of ordinary, slow-moving day that makes the sudden shift into chaos feel like a slap. Michael had just left a small independent bookstore, hoodie up, trying to keep a low profile as he walked down 6th Street, earbuds in but no music playing. He liked the illusion of isolation without the commitment. Then, through the corner of his eye, he saw two LAPD officers in pursuit, sprinting down the sidewalk, clearly already winded, shouting commands at someone ahead of them that Michael couldn't yet see. Within seconds, a man in a dark grey hoodie and oversized jeans came into view, bolting across the street without looking, weaving through the slow-moving cars with the instinct of someone who's been chased before. Something in Michael clicked, some split-second decision that bypassed thought entirely. He pulled his hood tighter, stepped off the curb, and ran. He wasn't sure what he thought he was doing, not yet. At first, it was just instinct, maybe ego, maybe something deeper. But when he realized the officers were falling behind and that no one else was doing anything, he committed. The suspect had a head start and younger legs, and by the time Michael reached the intersection, the guy had already disappeared down an alley, fast and panicked. The officers reached the curb seconds later, breathing hard, muttering something into their radios, eyes darting. Michael turned to them and asked quickly what was going on, why they were chasing him. One of them barked out something about robbery, fleeing the scene, possibly armed, but it was all half said through gasps and adrenaline. That's when Michael glanced down the street and remembered something. His car was parked just around the corner, a black unmarked SUV, nothing flashy but fast enough. He hesitated only for a second before blurting out that he had a vehicle nearby, that they could follow the guy before he got too far. The officers looked at each other, unsure if this was a terrible idea or their only option, but one of them simply said, "Let's go." They followed Michael around the corner, climbing into the SUV without ceremony, urgency overriding protocol. As he pulled out onto the street, Michael couldn't help but feel the weight of what he was doing. Driving two cops through city traffic in pursuit of a suspect who might be armed, whose face he hadn't even seen clearly. He wasn't trained for this. But his hands didn't shake, and the officers were giving directions, tracking the last known movement of the suspect through radio calls and guesswork. Michael tuned everything else out, focused entirely on scanning the streets, looking for the grey hoodie, for a hint of motion, for something to justify the strange sense that this moment wasn't just about the chase, that something was going to come from this. Something unexpected. Michael started running without thinking, cutting across the crowded sidewalk and nearly colliding with a cyclist as he narrowed in on the suspect's direction, his eyes locking on the grey hoodie that bobbed in and out of view like a ghost slipping between dimensions. But before he could close the distance, the man glanced back, spotted the officers still chasing him, and without breaking stride, veered sharply into a side lot, leaping into the driver's seat of a beat-up silver sedan that had clearly been left running. Planned or lucky, it didn't matter now. The engine roared to life and the car lurched forward, fishtailing slightly before speeding off down the alley. Michael stopped at the edge of the lot, panting hard, hands on his knees, watching helplessly as the sedan turned onto the main road and disappeared into the sprawl of traffic. He spun around and sprinted back to the officers, who had just arrived behind him, their faces red with exhaustion and disbelief. Without waiting for them to regroup, he blurted out, "Get in. I have a car. It's close." For a moment, they stared at him, caught between hesitation and urgency. But when the older officer muttered, "Let's move," under his breath, they followed him without argument. They piled into Michael's SUV, he threw it into gear and peeled out into the street, adrenaline pouring through his limbs like wildfire. As they turned the corner, Michael scanned every lane, every traffic light, looking for the tail end of that silver sedan. The officers were on the radio, relaying the direction and partial plate, while one of them pointed forward, shouting over the hum of sirens in the distance. They didn't see the suspect anymore. It looked like he'd vanished. But Michael didn't slow down. He knew the area, knew how the streets connected, how people tried to lose tails by weaving through side streets that seemed quiet but fed back into traffic arteries. He didn't say any of that. He just kept driving. A minute passed, then another. Tension was thick in the car, the kind that doesn't speak but pulses. Then, just as they were about to turn back, they spotted it. The silver sedan parked at the edge of a loading dock behind an old hardware store, engine still idling. Michael rolled past slowly, making no sudden moves, while the officers ducked low in their seats. The suspect, unaware of who was in the SUV, was leaning against the hood of his car, phone in hand, looking down the opposite direction. Maybe he thought he'd lost them. Maybe he thought he'd gotten away. Either way, he didn't see what was coming. Michael drove past the next block and pulled into a side alley, cutting the engine. One officer quietly radioed for backup, while the other opened his door and peered down the narrow alley, watching the suspect from a distance. "Wait," the younger one said quietly, voice low. "Let's not blow this." Michael stayed behind the wheel, silent. He wasn't sure what his role was now. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a hero. He was just the guy who had run after someone when no one else did. Then, almost casually, Michael stepped out of the car, walked across the street with the kind of slow, deliberate body language that makes people feel like nothing's wrong, and approached the man like he was just a passerby. He asked where he could get coffee nearby. Just that. The suspect looked up, confused, annoyed, maybe trying to gauge if this was someone he knew or if he should care. That split second of distraction was all it took. From behind the building, the officers closed in silently. Weapons drawn but low, voices steady but firm. The suspect turned just in time to see them before they grabbed his arms and pushed him to the ground. It happened fast, too fast for him to react. He didn't fight. Maybe he was too stunned. Maybe he knew it was over. Backup units arrived within minutes, sirens piercing through the noise of the city as other officers surrounded the area, securing the scene like it was a chessboard already won. Michael stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching everything with a strange sense of detachment. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel anything yet. The officers thanked him, of course, patted his shoulder, one even smiled and said something about luck being on their side, but Michael didn't really hear it. Something about the way it had all unfolded left a residue he couldn't shake. How close it had come to being something else, how none of it had been planned, and how, for a few seconds, he'd felt the weight of someone else's choices on his shoulders. And yet, something about it lingered in the air, unfinished, like a pause before the next unexpected turn. Because this wasn't the end, not really. Something bigger was coming, even if no one saw it yet. And if you think this was the whole story, just wait. It's worth it. Michael pulled the SUV smoothly to a stop, just a few feet from where the suspect was leaning against the hood of his silver sedan. His posture casual, as if he owned the block, phone in hand, eyes scanning some unseen message. Michael opened the door, stepped out deliberately, and crossed the street with a calm that belied the tension in his chest. He asked in a neutral tone where he might find a place to grab a coffee nearby, nodding as the suspect pointed vaguely down the street, apparently more interested in his phone than in the stranger who had just approached him. The suspect's attention was divided, his eyes flickering between Michael and his screen, unaware of the quiet movements unfolding behind him. From the shadows just beyond the alley, the police officers who had been lying in wait began to emerge, their approach silent but purposeful, weapons lowered yet ready. Michael's presence served as the perfect distraction, the calm face in the crowd that allowed the officers to close the gap unnoticed. As the suspect turned slightly to continue his vague directions, hands gesturing toward the corner cafe, the officers moved in swiftly, grabbing him from behind with firm but controlled force. The suddenness of it all left the suspect stunned, unable to resist, as cuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. Backup arrived moments later. Several squad cars converged on the scene with flashing lights, officers pouring out to secure the perimeter and gather evidence. Michael stood a few steps away, watching it all unfold, the weight of the moment settling on him like a thick fog.